Welcome to the Nordic Mythology podcast. I'm Daniel Farrand, owner of the company Horns of Odin, and I'm joined by Giorgia Sottotetti.
Correct.
There's so many T's in that surname.
I know.
I was having a little heart palpitation thinking of saying it.
Giorgia Sottotetti. It was perfect.
Thank you. Thank you for lying to me. Okay, so do you want to give a little introduction as to you, who you are, what you specialize in?
Yes, I'm an archaeologist. At least I have a BA in archaeology that I obtained at University of Pisa in Italy. And then I moved here in Iceland for the VMN master program, that is Viking and Medieval Norse program. And I graduated just last September, October. So I'm a postgraduate at University of Iceland. I'm not a PhD student yet. Let's see. But let's see what happens. But yeah, and my master thesis in this program at University of Iceland was focusing mostly on all Norse religions and archaeology, because I wanted to combine the two disciplines, obviously, because I come from an archaeological background. And I basically decided to deal with idols. Then we can analyze a bit better, like why I also decide to use the term idol, because I anticipate already it can be a rather loaded term. So it depends if you're a scholar, for example, more into Christian kind of studies. I got some scholars saying, like, are you sure you want to use the term idol is loaded and whatever. So I will go more into that.
Yeah.
But yeah, and we're going to discuss today basically the content of my thesis, because it was a rather structured thesis in which I analyzed different kind of different types of Nordic idols in Nordic paganism. So the historical period I was looking to goes from more or less 400 AD until 1100 AD. And I don't know, should I say, I don't know, the title of my thesis for whoever might be interested.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's a long one, but it's basically...
Aren't all thesis titles really long?
Yeah, perhaps.
It seems like they all are quite long.
Yeah, and it needs to be fancy, isn't it?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
But it's from the temple to your pocket, roles, types, contexts of idols in Nordic paganism, 400, 1100 AD. So yeah, it was a long one.
That's not the longest I've heard.
No, that's true. I managed to contain myself a bit. At least my supervisors was happy about it.
Okay, yeah, perfect. So we're gonna get into that shortly, but I think we have to speak a little bit about the most recent rune carve, the rune stone that's been found in Norway. I think it's the oldest one ever. Kind of rechanges.
So it seems, because it was found within an archaeological context, which is not given for granted, unfortunately. But in this case, it comes from an archaeological context, from a burial site in Norway, which means that they were able to date the layers and the organic, it comes from, it was in correspondence of cremation kind of burial, so they could analyze the fragment of bones in the layer strata, and the carbon dating seems to suggest like the time frame between 0 or 1 AD till 250, which... Sorry, I'm talking a lot.
No. That's what you're here to do. So yeah, I spent all day researching this, making notes, and then you've just come in and stole my thunder.
Oops.
No, I'm joking. I'm joking. But no, I have made some bullet points, because I figure with this kind of stuff, the sooner you can get the accurate information, the better, because I guess it gets diluted so fast, particularly I think when a lot of the original sources are going to be in Norwegian, and then you get British newspapers, American newspapers picking up on it, and then having to like translate it from Norwegian, and they probably add a little bit in, and then it soon starts playing a game of telephone, and the facts change. So I was hoping to try and get some out there quite soon. So yeah, I'll give you. I've actually checked these with Matthias Nordvig as well, so hopefully they're accurate. I was a bit too nervous to just do it without his approval.
Of course, no, I understand. But I mean, I'm not an expert either.
I know.
I'm not a runologist, but yeah.
Absolutely. And I think there's very limited information out there at the minute.
Yeah, for sure.
So I wanted to make some notes and then, like I said, check that they were accurate. So at least I'm giving the accurate information out, because this is super interesting, and it's changing the thoughts of runestone carving in particular.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they are going now to analyze it obviously further, and especially the rune inscriptions and whatever. But we might need to rewrite history in that sense, or like need to rethink about theories about runestones, how they originated, and since when they were already circulating, and since when they were being used. It's indeed is super interesting find.
Yeah,
also because it comes from archaeological context, so in that sense you can really back it up at least a bit more than if it would have been just a random finding.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, okay, so the stone itself is made of ringeric sandstone. It's 31 centimeters by 32 centimeters, and it's named after the place where it was discovered, which is Svingerud. I think probably butchering the name. Svingerud I think it was eastern Norway, and like as you said, it seems like it dates back to 1 to 250 AD, which predates any other runestone carving that we have. It was found in autumn of 2021, and it was basically a stone that has multiple carvings on it, and it was found with bones and charcoal, and they've used the bones and charcoal to date it. Like you said, it's the carbon dating of the bones and the charcoal. So I guess to a limited degree, you have to assume that they were all buried there together, but I think there's no evidence to suggest that they're not, because obviously the carbon dating the material around the stone, they can't date the actual stone itself.
Yeah, and also the other problem, let's say, with carbon dating is that obviously you never get calendar data. It's not like it's from AD 2005. It's just, it gives you a temporal space, but between 1 and 250,
it's a long time.
It's still, 2 centuries.
Absolutely, it's a long time, yeah. And it seems that the runes on there are a variation of the Elder Futhark, and it seems like it's an ancient Nordic language that seems to be the ancestor of the modern Nordic languages. So I guess that kind of shows a lineage all the way through. The front face has 8 runes which clearly stand out, which I think is the one that most people will see the pictures of those 8 runes that are kind of circulating around. But there are other inscriptions on it. And when it's converted from Latin, it seems that it says Idiberug, Idiberug. Yeah. And they thought this could possibly be the name of the person where it's buried, but obviously, again, there's so much more work to be done on it. They're not too sure. And or it could even be the name of Idibegu, and maybe the last letter is in the wrong place. Because again, with runes, it's not an exact science on its own, let alone when you're looking at something that predates everything that we already have. It makes it a little more difficult. It's more
complicated, yeah.
So again, the way of writing the older runes varied a lot based on your geographical location, who taught you, the memory of the person who was carving. There's no centralized document of like this letter means this. It's very much on the rune carver's own kind of perspective and their own little. They can play around with it as well, and I think that's why we get such a varied thing. Obviously, the language changed drastically from the time that it was carved through the Viking Age to the medieval age, which makes it even more difficult to interpret the runes and what they mean. And some of the other inscriptions on there is, I don't know if you've seen it, it's almost like someone was playing noughts and crosses, like a little, almost like a hashtag symbol carved into it.
Yeah.
Which again seems very kind of peculiar. It's almost as if someone's playing around and practicing, because again, I think there's the first three letters of the Futhark on there. So there's the F, the U, and the Th, which are all carved in a line. So it's almost as if someone's practicing, having a feel about playing with runes and just having a go and kind of seeing what they come up with. So these runes are the oldest known form of writing in Norway, and also seemingly used were seemingly used from the beginning of the current era all the way through the Viking Age to the medieval age with runes. Obviously, I touched on that there. The alphabet of them is called the Futhark, and we get that with those three runes in that order. Kind of suggests that this can't be the first. Obviously, we always have to assume we don't find the first ever one. So if we find this one, there probably is something sooner. And I guess the idea that we have those three runes together is showing there's already this established alphabet. So
that's the point, which is very interesting, because the dating is from, let's say, 1 to 250, but in order to be carved, like, it means that it's already circulating since some time before. Yeah,
and there's already there's already that somewhat structured Futhark organization of the runes. So it's already a somewhat organized thing. So there has to be things older than that somewhere.
So that's very, very exciting. And I have some friends who are runologists, and they are like, oh my gosh, they're super excited about this finding, which obvious reasons, it's very, very interesting find indeed.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think the best sources for information that I found were the two of the people who were working on the discovery in Norway, and it was Krista Vasshus and Crystal Zelmer. And I think both of their their Twitter pages have good feeds in English where you can they've documented it as they've gone through in a series of short tweets and in order, and you can have a look at their finds and get some accurate information from the horse's mouth, as you say.
And who knows if we don't find more fragments, because they're still excavating in that site. So from what I heard, they also find other fragments recently, maybe last August, September, because they excavate more or less, I believe every summer season, like you usually do in Scandinavia.
Yeah.
You use the summer to investigate. So who knows, maybe we'll get more.
Well, that's it. I think this, like I said, this was found in autumn last year. So it's been kept quiet for
obvious reasons.
So maybe they have already found other parts, but they're just not ready to reveal the information just yet.
Might be.
Maybe. Oh, you seem like you know something.
No.
Okay, let's get off that topic. Quick. Okay, no, let's talk about idols. And I mean, again, as I was saying to you before the show, this is very much an idiot asking an expert kind of podcast. So
I feel honored to be called an expert. I've been studying this material, but I'm also a very humble person. I'm just a postgraduate, Yeah.
No, well, you know more than I do, and probably 99% of the people listening. So it's definitely going to be educational for us all. But like I said, it's usually, hopefully I can ask the questions that maybe scholars overlook sometimes and go under the radar, because you're all kind of assuming a certain level of knowledge before you get into the conversations. Whereas I don't have much knowledge, so I'm going to.
Then I'm here to share my knowledge about this material.
That's it, exactly. So let's start with what an idol is, maybe, because you touched on it before, how it's a loaded kind of term.
Yeah.
So maybe let's start there.
Yeah, sure. Well, yeah, it is a loaded term, especially also in English language, but because it comes more, it was used during Christian times to identify what were considered like fake, false gods, pagan gods, to contrapose to like what was the real faith, the real belief that was the Christian God. So I got a bit of comments by other scholars like, are you sure you want to use it? Because basically what I did in my thesis, I didn't focus only on Nordic idols. In order to study them, I decided to do a cross-cultural comparison with the better known classical Mediterranean world, in which we have it's better study. I also come from that background. There's plenty of knowledge regarding the idols, like pagan idols in that context. So since we have more questions and less answers in the Nordic one, I decided why don't use a comparative method and put this word into communication and see if I manage to answer my research questions. And therefore I built up a typology of idols. Some are derived from the classical world, others are just properly Nordic, and which this typology is just my neutral tool within the comparative method. It's nothing written in stone. It's just what helped me to try to answer certain questions. And then, of course, I needed a terminology that would be consistent. So I was wondering about the material I was dealing with, and I had to go for a term. And I decided to go for idols because any other term that would be maybe preferably less loaded than idol would not work. I don't know, image, figure, figurine, statuette. They would be either too broad, either too specific. Because I was dealing with several types of idols, from big size to the tiny one, Nordic that I call pocket idols, to pillar idols, pendants, like something that I'm wearing here. And so forth. So I needed also to go for something that would be coherent, in my text. And I believe that idol actually fits well because I don't want to use it within this Christian optic. I'm using it more as in a neutral value, like something that is worshipped, because I am analyzing material and artifacts that I believe are religiously connoted kind of artifacts. So I'm dealing with something that pertains religion, something that I believe pertains rituals, religious rituals. So idol, I think, fits in that sense, in wanting to analyze this material as something that is worshipped. And in my personal view, I also I connected a bit to the Mercier-Eliade, for example, definition of hierophanies. So like idol, to me, the way I use it through my text is something, in this case, which has anthropomorphic shape, because that's what I was analyzing specifically. So something endowed with anthropomorphic shape through which the sacred is experienced by a person. So that was a bit my way to justify why I was using idol instead of figure or image or any other term.
Okay, that brought me my first question.
So if that makes sense, you can ask.
It does. No, it does, because I think I can't think of a different word in English that suits. Because like you say, if you use statuette, I'm thinking of something bigger, but you don't have to worship it. It could just be a statue or something. Whereas a figure to me would be something small. Whereas like you say, an idol it can be big, it can be small, but it has that connotation of something that's worshipped.
And also figure would be too broad and too general. Anything can be a figure. And I wanted something that meant I'm looking into something that is religiously connoted. So that was vital for my definition. And I didn't use, for example, the word deities or gods, like pocket gods or whatever, because I believe that, and then we will, or I can just introduce it now, like what I was doing in my research. I wanted to ask other questions, because when you analyze Nordic idols, especially like these sort of pendants, or like what I call pocket idols, that are these tiny figurines, fully three-dimensional, most of the research focus on trying to identify them with a specific god within the Nordic pantheon, which is not really what I wanted to do with my thesis, because I think that, I mean, it's a very interesting question to ask, but we can't really ask the question because we don't have really enough data to say this is necessarily 100% sure this is Thor rather than Freyr rather than Odin. So I didn't want to use God or deity because first, we are not sure, and idol can be more broad in that sense, because, you know, the Nordic pantheon is not just about deities. There are other mythological creatures. There are Alvar, there are Visir, Valkyriur, Jotnar, Dvergar. So I wanted idol, I think, was the word that the term would work better for my kind of typology and the material I was analyzing.
No, I think it's the right word. It's without a doubt. But you mentioned that they had to be anthropomorphic. So for anybody listening that doesn't know what that means, it means in human, like taking a human form and a human shape. Is that, because that got me thinking, like, first of all, do we know of any idols that aren't in human form, and would they still class as an idol? Because obviously we do have well-known creatures from like the Nordic pantheon, I guess, like something like Fenrir, Jormungandr, Sleipnir. Like, I don't know whether you would have an idol of those or a figurine. Do they exist, and could they be idols?
Not that we have found archaeologically. So that's what I was doing. I was taking the archaeological material and artifacts. I made a list and I have a database, and then I was like, okay, there are several objects, artifacts that have anthropomorphic, so humanoid shape. Therefore, I decided to analyze those. I argue in my thesis that maybe as we might read, you know, in Völsaþáttur, there's, for example, I don't know if you know, it is like a short account in the Icelandic sagas in which there's this rather old lady living in Iceland, doing these sort of repetitive rituals every evening, using basically the cut penis of a horses that she dubbed as Volsi, and she does some sort of rituals. She chants over it, and this penis gets basically erected, and she does rituals. So we might.
Why do I feel like you're setting me up with this story? I feel like you're setting me up with this story. I'm trying to be on my best behavior, and there's too many jokes to make about that.
It's very fun, and obviously it was written as an account that is maybe from 14th century. It's arguable, like scholars argue, no, it's just Christian stuff. Obviously, I mean, there are a lot of grotesque elements in it. If you even just the scene, you know, like this old lady chanting over horse penis, you know, it's obviously, but there are other elements that you might argue, you know, maybe there's something going on there. And we might argue that might have been a sort of idol within more a domestic kind of cult, this case in Iceland.
So we could have little penis pocket idols turning up. Is that what we're getting at?
Who knows? There are in a Roman context. They were very fond of penises. Like they would also have like penises with some, how do you call them? Rattles, something that sounds, you know, with the air moving, like a penis with some It's my English.
Okay, no,
But
okay.
they would hang them at the door of.
So kind of like almost like a wind chime.
Sort of. It would be like, it's called apotropaiko in function. It would like chase away evil or bad energy, whatever, because the penis was also connected to Priapo, the god. Is a Roman god, like that is connected to fertility, abundance, and it's like a good thing to have at the door. So
I need one of these. I need one. If anyone can get hold of one, please send me one, because
I will. You find them also in some shops, also in Pompeii, or sort of like they found some.
Oh, really?
Yeah, you can see this stuff in museums. Like, Romans were very much into penises, and in that sense. But you find penises in Nordic context too. If you think, since the Bronze Age, carvings and stuff. So,
at what point do you think this is going way off topic? But at what point do you think it became quite taboo? Because there must have been at some point where there was a change from like it being quite open and nobody cares. Everyone's got one. They're all different sizes or whatever. Like at some point, like it seemed like not many people cared. And then at some point, it's like now everyone's really shy about their body. And
I'm not sure, but I think it's rather modern, because even just like if you think Volsatautur is recorded, like written down in 14th century by Christian people, and still they bother to write about it. And of course, there are grotesque elements, but it's something that they were fine writing and handing down. So, and we don't have any this account, like people were arguing maybe it's just Christian inventiveness. So there's nothing real about it, because we don't have a correspective in Icelandic folklore. But we do have a correspective in Faroese folklore, where until the 19th or early 20th century, during marriages, they would pass around, like, people come together to celebrate, and they would pass around not a penis, but a tail of a ram that would be, and it passes around, and every people who receives it in circle, he needs to chant the rimur or chant whatever over it before passing it. That reminds what's going on actually in Volsatautur, the Icelandic accounts. So, I think it's rather modern. Like we became more like, you don't talk, you don't say, you don't.
Yeah, I think it is a very modern thing, and hopefully we get out of that. Hopefully it changes. Everyone be free again. Everyone be free. Who cares? Okay, let's get back to idols specifically. Okay, so you can tell me. I'll tell you what I think an Nordic idol is or would be, and then you can maybe tell me if I'm wrong, which usually is what happens. So I would say that it would either be, if it was a large one, I would say it would probably be made of wood, like a wooden carving in the shape of, to represent a god. That would be my thought. It was that it would be probably one of the main gods, probably like you say Odin, Thor, Freya, Frey, like one of those kind of like top tier gods. And then it's the same with like a pocket one, that it would probably be maybe of bronze or maybe like bone, something like that. And there would be more of like maybe a couple of inch in height, usually sat on a throne of some sort. So that's what they would be my two types of idols.
Well, that's actually correct, and they are both into my typology. But I eventually got 7 categories. So I was which is interesting. Maybe there are more, but the 7 are the one I analyzed in my thesis. And idols pertaining to domestic cult, because I started as I said, I did a cross-cultural comparison, right, with the Greek and Roman world, because we have huge quantity of archaeological data and we have way more answers in that field. So the first 4 types of my Nordic typology derives from the Mediterranean one, and then I discuss idols that are just Nordic, at least they look properly Nordic. So we have idols pertaining to the domestic cult, idols as offerings to the deities, idol as part of grave goods, so something that you find in a burial, for example, and idols, like as you said, like the more big size, big idols in sacred, more public kind of buildings, which very likely, yes, they were in wood, and it would be awesome if we would have examples now to work on. We don't, unfortunately.
We don't. Okay. Just before I forget this, in the stave churches, am I right in thinking that on top of some of the pillars they have little figures? Would they class as idols? So anybody, just to explain what they are. So inside the stave churches, obviously you get the staves, the big pillars that go up, which you're holding up, and inside at the top of those, and quite a few, if I'm right, they have little figures which faces of the different gods, which I guess was maybe there to look down on people. I'm not sure.
For example, in Hegge stave church in Norway, there is also very super famous one, the one that is called Odin mask, even though it's dated 13th century, so obviously it's a bit late, but is the one that has this face with just one eye and this dangling tongue, so maybe perhaps an hanged man, reminding of Odin. Indeed. Those is what I would define more, not specifically what you find in stave churches, because it's a bit temporally is after the Viking Age was focused on. But to give an example, they is what I call more pillar idols that might very well existed in the Nordic context in iron, especially Viking Age. For example, the Önveisuller, that are like the high seat pillars that we find plenty of description also in written sources. Like Landnamabok or Erbikja Saga, for example, where you have account of, in this case, this character Thorolfur Mostraskegg that moves from Norway to Iceland, and he decides to bring his Hof, his temple, to Iceland. And among the several pillars, there are 2, especially one, which has the face of, they say, Thor. Thor is carved in it, and then they use it, they throw it, they are on the ship, they throw it in the sea, and then they wait until Thor comes to land in Iceland, which is the point where they're going to settle, and then they build up the temple again. So that is more, I don't think, to me, I call it more a possible pillar idol, because despite they are three-dimensional, but they are not endowed with full relief as other big-size idol. We get many accounts in the sagas about how they would look like. As you said, maybe in wood, sitting on a throne, and they mention like Thor or Freyr and stuff. And they would be in sacred buildings like what we call Hof, temples. So this pillar idol is another possible.
I jumped the gun. Okay, what are the last ones before I ask any more questions?
So we have pillar idols was the 5th, then possible pendant idols representing either gods, deities, or not necessarily, like what I'm wearing now. For example, this is a replica from Sweden.
Yeah.
And then the last is pocket idols, I call pocket idols. So 7 different types, at least so far, from what I analyzed.
So, okay. So you mentioned pendant idols.
Yeah.
Now, clearly everyone knows of Milner as kind of like an amulet type. I guess that's not strictly an idol, but obviously it's a very clear representation of a single god. So where does that sit?
So where didn't hear you well?
So where would that sit in kind of the scale of things? Because it's not an idol, because it's not a figure of him, but it is very much a kind of representation of him.
That's a very interesting question. I didn't really include it in my typology because I had to select, and I was like, I'm only dealing with anthropomorphic, so humanoid shape, figurative shape. But it's very interesting because it's one kind of pendant that is very, very recurrent in all Scandinavia, coming from different archaeological context. Is called the Thor hammer for, well, a reason. It could be a very, very good interpretation for it. So, and also very interestingly enough, is found mostly when it's found in burial context. The 90% of times, if not more, is found in female, or what we can judge as female kind of burials, which that's very interesting. But I didn't.
There's so many Viking bros with their big chains and their big millers hanging down here. They're so upset you just said that.
They're upset.
They're taking them off and they're throwing them across the room. They're like, I don't want this anymore. Yeah, I don't want it anymore.
Yeah, it was mostly in female burials. Right? So it was mostly women wearing it, which is super cool, I think.
Okay, I'm gonna have to ask: do you know, or can you guess as to why that might be?
It's hard to say. It's for the same reason also all these kinds of pendants, for example, like the so-called Valkyrie type and whatever. It seems really, according to archaeological data, that would be mostly women wearing this. It might be that it might connect, there are different interpretations. It could be more of a ritualistic purpose, so it could be just, ornamental. It could be a status, like stating what's your social class, for example. It might be that women, perhaps, they could manifest more to people their, how can I say, their religious identity more towards this kind of artifacts, while men, they were maybe more actively participating in rituals, perhaps. So they would not need maybe this kind of ornamentation because they would manifest their, they would be active, religiously active in.
In another way.
Yeah, so, but is an open question. There's no definitive answer to it.
I think that makes sense, because obviously when you think of Thor, he is very much the most stereotypical manly character. He's drinking a lot, he's eating a lot, he's this big.
Yeah, he gets angry often.
Yeah, gets angry. Yeah, that's one. That's definitely on there. He's big, butch, kind of strength, a little bit dim at times, and quite kind of Neanderthal-like. So you would assume that it would be more men that would kind of certainly nowadays, I would assume it's probably more men that.
Yeah. I see more men wearing it rather than girls. Yeah.
So you would just assume that it was the same back then. So it's very interesting that you say
the archaeological data, suggests something different. So that's fascinating.
Yeah, that is fascinating. Okay, so we're gonna. I think if we finish on pocket idols, because I know that's the one that we wanted to focus. So I'll try and ask my questions about all the other ones first, and then we'll go to
we have to make it briefly, because I'm very aware, it was a long thesis, very structured, so 1 hour I'm not sure it's going to be enough to talk about
if you've got the time, I don't mind going a little bit longer. It depends on if you've got somewhere to be.
I have nothing to do.
We can go a little bit longer. Don't worry.
If people are not bored by the topic or anything, I'm sure.
I'm interested to sod them.
Good.
they can listen if they want. If not, well, I'm interested. I'm learning. Okay. So do we have no wooden ones from the Viking Age specifically?
Not from the Viking Age specifically. We have something from the Bronze Age. like the Brandenberg, the very tall anthropomorphic figure with a very long phallus in that case. We have one specimen, like one, let's call it idol. It was found random finding, but upright on a bog in Denmark.
Okay.
So, right? That's is called Rude Eskilsturp. Sorry if there's any Danish people here. I don't know Danish. Possibly the pronunciation sucks, but that's very interesting. That is the closest we can get because it's dated more or less 500 AD. So it's not as old as the Bronze Age. It's a bit more, it's already Iron Age, but Viking Age, not at the moment.
So we have before and we have after. So here's my question. Do we get people who then say they clearly didn't make idols out of wood because we don't have one? Because I feel like that's something from doing this show for
it's
that
something
long,
that people might say, like, oh, you don't have evidence. But, well, we have a lot of accounts, which obviously it's okay. It's sagas or accounts, they're written down in Christian times. So you have to be aware, you have to have source criticism. Okay, fine. But there are a lot of accounts. And also, wood is a very organic material. I'm sure it was there. It simply didn't got preserved. And that's just a very logical explanation, Unfortunately, what got preserved is just, it happened just by chance. And we were just very lucky.
I would agree with that. And I just ask because it's something that's come up time and time again on the podcast, particularly when it comes to musical instruments, that you get people that are like, oh, they fucking didn't have music because we don't have a drum from. And it's like, yeah, they probably did have drums. We just don't have one.
I'm very sure they did. And also, if you look at the tradition that comes after, for example, the churches in Norway, the stav church is made completely in wood. And obviously, if you also think about the context, the geographical context, in Scandinavia would be the main material, right? Especially if you want to create an idol that is in big size, you can't do it out of bone, right? Out of bone would be a tiny object, but if you want something grand, you don't have marble like Greek and Romans, but you have a lot of forest and wood, so it would make sense also for the context.
Yeah, absolutely. It's such an important building material. Still today, all the houses are made out of wood, so it would make perfect.
That's true.
It would make perfect sense. So, I guess my next question is: God posts. That's what I would think of when I think of an idol that's big, maybe like 4 foot, 5 foot in height. Made from like a single pillar of wood that's then carved, usually with like a figure standing with, usually quite a big head, and then it's all in like that single. So the head is the width of the pillar, and then you get like the little shoulders and the legs intend to be stood. How accurate are those? Or are they just more of a modern thing?
Well, it depends. If according to sagas, they are more like effigies, like human size. So there are some descriptions that say, okay, they're sitting in throne, or they are as big as a man, like a real man. Okay. So maybe they are not so monumental as you might imagine, but big enough to have, real size, let's say. Then if we suppose that those real size effigies, they would be more in what we can call temples or sacred buildings, and that are more indoor, enclosed area. Then if we suppose that they also had pillars more outdoors, like sort of pillar idols, maybe something that is way taller, is not so well detail carved, but it has a face. Like we have some accounts about that too. Like, for example, Ibn Fadlan, that talks about these sort of pillars in circle that have face, and people give offering to them, and they call maybe the main figure Lord. That's the translation from the Arabic text. And so maybe it's something taller, more like you imagine, like something more, straight out from the trunk of wood and has a face. And we have some accounts about that. We don't have the material, unfortunately. We have, though, archaeologically, sometimes in certain sites, like I remember I was writing about Tissø in Denmark. Sometimes you find some post holes in the layer, in the ground. You don't have the pillars any longer because that's disintegrated because it's organic material, but you have the trace in negative on the layer, the soil layer. And sometimes you find them not necessarily with in line, or not necessarily having a plant that might be like a building. So there's no real structure in that. You just find them, and with layers that are supposed to be, they are interpreted as ritual sort of layers. So you have like leftovers of organic food, bones of animals that might have been sacrificed, and these places usually are outside enough from the main village or whatever, so there's no real interpretation of, that was just a settlement where people would eat. Maybe the interpretation of something more ritualistic going on here is maybe the good interpretation to go for. So we don't have physically a pillar or a big size idol from Viking Age, unfortunately.
No, I think that's so fascinating, because I never thought of a post hole like that. Obviously, I knew that they used them to map buildings and look at where the structural beams would be, I guess. But I never thought of, like, if you just get one over here on its own, that maybe you could look into that, especially if it's got what is seemingly ritualistic items around it. That's fascinating.
There are also, indeed, there are also pillars that sometimes you don't just find fragments of bones, but you find the whole head of a horse, for example.
Okay.
Or a goat or a dog. You find that in Uppsala, for example, what has been interpreted as the ritual road heading, in Gamla Uppsala, you have these pillars in line, and when they dig them up, they had the postholes, obviously not the pillar any longer, but within the filling of the postholes, you find like whole skulls of animal and other bones of animals that obviously were sacrificed and hanged there. So there was something going on, I believe, with pillars or pillar idols in Nordic Scandinavia, Nordic times. I believe so. It's maybe harder to prove, but we have some data there.
Oh, it's so fun how much you can speculate, and I think that's part of the interest in all of this for a lot of people, particularly when it comes to like Viking Age, Nordic mythology, because there are so many holes in between, that people can kind of interpret this and apply it to themselves and really kind of make it personal. And I find it so fascinating. I often find myself wondering if I could just go there and look and see, like, would I want to? Because would it ruin it? Would it kind of just not be what I was expecting, maybe?
Maybe we are discussing about rituals, and then there was nothing about rituals at all. They were just, I don't know, doing random stuff.
Exactly. And Thor was just this really skinny man. He wasn't the booming masculine figure that everyone thinks he was. He could just all be ruined in a moment. Okay.
Moment.
That's it. So let's talk about pendant idols before we go to pocket, because I am fascinated by that. So what or who do we know? Because again, interestingly enough, you said earlier on about how everybody wants to know what or who the idol is. And I guess that's what I would do if I found a little figure. I'd be like, who's this? And that would be the first thing I'd want to know is like, who is it? What can I look at it? How can I figure it out? So do we know who do we have?
Sko, as they would say here in Icelandic, like so.
Okay.
I don't believe we can really answer the question, like honest opinion. We can speculate about it. No harm in doing, say, okay, this might be a Valkyrie or like, I don't know, a armored figurine might be a shield maiden or a Valkyrie or this. It's fine. The point is that we can't say, like the example I use to explain it to people is, for example, in classic and Roman and Greek in context, when you have a certain iconographical representation of a god or whatever, we know that that is Heracles or that is Zeus rather than Minerva, not just because we have a lot of written accounts that describe their iconography, but because we have like inscriptions, right? So this is Zeus, the mighty god, whatever. So we know that that's Zeus, and therefore the iconography repeats always through time. So every time we find a new statue in Greece, or like in some place that was once the Roman Empire, as soon as we dig it up, we look at the iconography and we know, okay, this is Minerva, this is Apollo, and blah, blah, blah. Mm-hmm. Because we have also the archaeological data backing up, because you find the inscription. We do not have anything of this sort in the Nordic context, unfortunately, because I would also love to say, oh, this is absolutely Thor, how they would imagine it and how they would portray it, you know, it would be so cool. But we can't really. So what I was trying to do with my thesis, it was like, I know that there's a lot of temptation to try to give an identity, identify the figurine you're dealing with, but you might end up being a bit stuck, like arguing if it's this character A or B, and then maybe not looking into, I don't know, what was the religious context, what does the archaeological data suggest about this artifact that was produced, how was it employed? Like, for example, this, and then we will go also for not just pendants, but pocket idols, because they do exist, right, in the archaeological data database. But what are they? Not necessarily which identity do they have, but why do they exist? Do they exist? How they were employed by people? You know, I think there are maybe many more interesting questions to ask about, rather than be fixated about, is Thor? No. Is Odin? No. I say it's Freyr. And I'm like, okay, we can't know anyways. Yeah. But that's my personal approach to it. But I wish I could know. Obviously, I am dying of curiosity to know if that's really, you know, Thor or Freyr. But yeah, we can't know really. Yeah. Do I answer your
No, you do.
question?
And I think that's very commendable in you and obviously your research, and it means that you stay very, very objective, because it must be hard to not put your own feelings in there, and it's kind of fun giving it a name, bringing it to life. It just adds that little bit of something to it. But also, I imagine it can be very leading. If you think it's Odin, then you start looking maybe at other aspects of it, and it's, is that a spear? Yeah. Does he have one eye? Is it this? So it could maybe lead you down the wrong path as well. So I think it's very commendable to stay as focused and just be, I'm going to look at this as it is and what it is, and see what we can determine without being led.
Yeah.
So
that's what I was trying to do.
yeah. So when it comes to pendants, like how common were they? Do we have a lot of them, and what do you think their purpose would be to have this little idol figure around your neck?
Well, pendants are super common in Scandinavia, all sorts of pendants, not just anthropomorphic ones, so with humanoid shape. We have, I think, some thousands of different kinds, Thor Summer, the so-called Thor Summer, Valkyrie, so-called Valkyries, I don't know, like swords and blah, blah, blah. The humanoid, the one endowed with humanoid shape, though, are way less common in proportion.
Okay.
I think, at least in my thesis, I was using a PhD thesis from Bo Jensen, that is a scholar that was analyzing pendants in general in Scandinavia, especially during the late Iron Age, Viking Age. So he was dealing with huge amount of data. And what he had about anthropomorphic pendants, they were no more than 50 specimens on thousands of other kinds of pendants. So they are not so common. It's also true that his thesis was from 2010, so it might be that now we have more pendants like this because, like you excavate more, there's a lot of metal detecting going on in the last year, so you always find a lot of new material. So I also have, for example, to catch up a bit, because I wrote my thesis and submitted in September, October. I'm already sure that my database is outdated because almost every day they find new things by metal detecting.
Of course.
So in numbers, they're not as common and as other kinds of pendants, which is interesting. The context, the archaeological context in which they're found are mostly in burials. Female one.
Okay.
They are sometimes found in layers of, settlements or as random findings. So you don't really have an archaeological context in that sense, but most of them are from the funerary kind of context. So in a burial, which is interesting because it might be really then they go into, they are part of the grave goods because they were really some items that were worn and used by the person that eventually then dies and is buried with it. And I call them pendants because I wanted to keep more a neutral value to the term, because archaeology sometimes they interchangeably use jewels, amulets, pendants, but it's not exactly the same thing. So a pendant can be a jewel, a pendant can be an amulet. If
it's a little more universal.
But I believe they could have been amulets. At least the fact that you find them in a funerary, like in a burial kind of context, it might fit as interpretation, like an amulet, something that you can, as a ritual, religious, magical kind of purpose. So this might be, let's say that is really a Valkyrie or a Dis, like a goddess, a Dis, that you believe in, and then you want to wear it on you because even just touching it or wearing it might be something that can protect you, or she's always with you somewhat. It's an interpretation that I think can fit if you want to go, towards that direction. Indeed.
I mean, it would make perfect sense. Even just this whole conversation, you've been kind of holding the one around your neck, you've been rubbing it and it's that kind of feel. It's there. It
feels comfortable, actually. I like to do it.
It's almost bringing its own to life in the conversation. So would they tend to be two-dimensional like the one that you're wearing, or do we find three-dimensional pendants?
We have one example of, at least in Scandinavia, of a three-dimensional one. That is the one from Hortby in Denmark. That is the so-called shield maiden. Is like this female figurine with armored with a sword and a shield, which is a rather unique find, because usually they are, I call them 2.5 dimensional because whatever, but usually they are like this. They don't have a full three-dimensionality, except the Hortby, Danish one, which it's very cool because that could also be potentially a pocket idol that you can also wear. So either you keep it in your pouch, or you can also wear it the neck. So
so we got a little crossover. I like that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that happens very often with archaeological artifacts. Like, for example, then we will also, I think, soon move to the pocket idols. But there are some, at least we have an example of one possible pocket idol found here in Iceland, made out of bone. Is very famous Baldursheimer figurine that is found in archaeological context, and it was found in a burial mound. So you see, according to my typology, okay, that's something that you find in a grave goods, so idols as part of a grave goods. But before ending there, it was obviously used. So you have to go out of that context and go back, while this object was living with the owner, then it was maybe a pocket idol. And, it's not, you don't go just for compartments, like the artifacts, archaeological culture artifacts, they can have different function, they are sort of alive, for the same reason when, for example, they get destroyed and put in the burial, they die sort of because they have to follow the owner. Just an example.
Yeah, no, it makes perfect sense, because you all have to look at today with culture. I can't think of an example off the top of my head, but you always get, okay, I do have an example. Might not be the best example. So
go ahead.
Might be a good example. I'm not, I haven't made my mind up yet. Okay. So do you know what a bum bag is, or a fanny pack in America?
I can't hear you so well.
Okay, so do you know what a bum bag is, or a fanny pack?
No?
Like the bag that you wear around your waist that tourists wear to keep their passport in.
Okay.
You know them.
Yeah, sure.
But then now in more modern culture, you tend to see a lot of people wearing them like over the shoulder. Because they're too cool to wear them around the waist. So they wear them across the shoulder, and it's a little bit more socially acceptable these days. But I guess it's a similar type of sort of thing where you have the exact same item, but depending on the culture, the person, it can be worn in different ways and take on a different life. And I'm sure there's a much better example than that, but that's all I had.
But that's
works. The best I had.
I get what you mean.
I think it works, maybe. Okay. Yeah. Let's go to pocket idols, because I've got a bunch of questions about these. Maybe you start with what you would qualify as a pocket idol, or what classes as a pocket idol.
So, according to my definition, a pocket idol is anthropomorphic, so humanoid shaped kind of idols, is three-dimensional. It is tiny, like according to my database, goes maybe from 3 centimeters up to even 10, but usually, actually I have, where is it? I have an example here. This is a replica, I don't know. It's called Eirar image from Iceland.
This was the one that I was going to ask.
That is between 6 and 7.
I have him as well. This was the one I was going to ask you. This was the one that I was going to ask you about.
So something that in a pouch, something tiny, portable, like this.
Okay, we'll save the specifics of this little gentleman.
Yeah.
We'll come back to him once we've established what a pocket idol is.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's a small little figure that can fit in a pouch that you can sort of carry with you. It's humanoid. So my first question is, what's the point of it? Because it has no has no real use. You can't use it for something. It doesn't do anything. It's not on show where like around your neck. It's not a fashion accessory. It's just this little thing that you put in your pouch that you carry with you for some reason. So yeah, well, what do you think the reason is?
Well, that's a very good question. We don't have safe answers, but we might give possible interpretations. Well, yeah, it's something that you carry with you, right? I also derived my definition because there are very few, 2, 3 written accounts in sagas that they say this person had what we can call a pocket idol, a tiny figurine, anthropomorphic figurine, and he would keep it in the pouch. We have no whatsoever any kind of detail or indication what they would do with these artifacts.
Okay.
Just they keep them in the pouch.
Okay.
So now we have to use a bit our interpretation, our imagination, like what are they there for? Well, there might be amulets, again, something that you want to carry with you for good protection or whatever. Maybe they were more actively used. Maybe it's what I believe is like they are obviously religiously connoted kind of artifacts, possibly employed in private sort of ritual, private rituals, I would say. So I don't know, maybe once you're alone and maybe you're far from home, you can't go to the temple, and let's say you're very much a believer of Thor or Freyr, and in that moment you feel that you're having, I don't know, your moment of spirituality, and you carry it in your pouch. So instead of just carrying it, you might actively take it out and, I don't know, pray, do some sort of ritual, I don't know, light a fire and give an offering to the, I don't know. Obviously, we are going into speculation, or as I want to call it, interpretation, possible interpretation. Obviously, there's a question mark at the end of it. But yeah, like I think they were also done to, not just to be carried, but also to be touched, maybe to behold. For example, like this one is usually interpreted as Thor. Obviously, we don't know. I think among all kinds of different idols being certain gods or deities, this might actually be Thor, but I don't know, obviously. But let's say that...
This was the one that I was going to ask you about, because when you said that you didn't really want to say who they were. Now, for the people that are just listening, this is a figure who sat on a seat, a throne.
Yeah.
He has what looks very much like what we would say would be Milner, or an upside down cross in between his legs, and he has a little pointy hat on. We'll put it has mustache. It does have a mustache. So we'll put a link to it in the show notes so everyone can see it. But it is quite an iconic figure. I think a lot of people will have seen this. And just looking at it, I think the average person would just go, "Okay, that's Thor." Like, of course it's Thor. He's holding an apple. But you said maybe not.
Well, we can't know with certainty. I mean, it would be also, if on the back it would be carved like Thor, then we would know. Someone in the chat says that dwarves had hammers too. That's quite right. Dvergar had hammers too, so it's open to question. But there's a very interesting book by Richard Perkins that, well, he's rather convinced that this might actually be Thor, and he argues it quite well. And he also used some material like Adam of Bremen and other sources like that connect Thor with not just the thunderbolt, but with air, and like he can produce wind, for example. Is a god that you might want to pray if you are into seafaring, for example, if you're a sailor or whatever. And in this image, like it seems that he's splitting his beard, like as if he would blow on it. And we have a Thautor, a small account in the Icelandic sagas, which says that he generates wings when he splits his beard and blows into it. So there are some elements for which this could be it could be Thor. Okay. And I like the idea because since we have this pocket idol, can you imagine? I can imagine maybe a person that is maybe leaving Norway and going to Iceland, for example, and is very much a believer in Thor, and maybe he has a pocket idol exactly like this, and maybe while he's going into, he's shipping to reach Iceland, and back in the days, like the weather could turn bad and you could easily drown. So maybe you had it in your pouch, and then maybe you see some clouds and the weather doesn't look very nice, it might be dangerous. So maybe you touch it or rub it, or maybe you take it out of your pouch and you do some sort of ritual, or you talk with it, or whatever, obviously I'm letting my imagination run, but perhaps, like the question is still there, right? How they were used, because obviously we have archaeological data about these figurines. And as you said, they don't have real practical purpose. They are not tools. So why are they there?
So how common are they? Do we have a lot of them?
We don't have a lot, but we have enough. I would say we have in Scandinavia and also in England, for example, we have, I think, at least these three-dimensional, at least around 30 or more specimen of figurines. There might be, I do believe there might be more. It's just, there's so much that we still need to excavate. There's so much that needs to be found, because most of them, actually, almost all of them, unfortunately, they don't really have a safe archaeological context. Usually they are stray finds. Many of them, especially also in England and now in Denmark, they come from metal detecting. So people authorized to go metal detecting, they go in a field and then the thingy beeps and then they dig a bit and they, oh, wow, an anthropomorphic figurine, another one. But the archaeological context is a bit, who knows if you would make an excavation every time you find a figurine, if you find, I don't know, a settlement, a temple, or maybe you find nothing, maybe it was something that just dropped out of the pouch of a person who was carrying it.
And how many British farmers have one of those sat on the mantelpiece that they never declared, that they just found in the field and was like, this is cool, I'm just going to take this home.
This is cool, I'm going to keep it.
Yeah, exactly. I'm sure that must happen all the time.
Oh yeah, it happens all the time with archaeological stuff. In Italy too, don't let me start.
No, really. So do they all tend to be made of metal, or do we have bone ones, wooden ones, or is it a case that like they may be wood ones but they've decomposed?
We have, yeah, sure. I mean, we have a bone one that is the other Icelandic one that looks very much like this. Is very famous, Baldursheimur. It was found, both were found in North Iceland. Just this has no archaeological context. The other one comes from a burial mound. So that is in bone and it got preserved. But that's the only example that I can think about. Most of them are like in metal, but here we go again. There might have been way more possible pocket idols, maybe made in bone and wood, but they just didn't make it to our modern days because it's organic material, so it doesn't preserve.
I would probably think that it would be quite expensive to have a bronze one.
This would be more expensive, yeah.
So maybe the everyday person would just have a little wooden one.
Yeah, wood or bone would be way cheaper, indeed.
Because mine would be like a little stick person that I made myself, and it would just be like, it'd be like a little twig man that just had like tricks for arms, tricks for legs, and I'd be like, this is fine. He's staying in my pouch because that's the best I can do. But I'm sure everybody
possibly was also like this. You know?
Yeah, I'm sure everybody had their own.
Yeah, of course. I mean, why not? It's something that I believe it was very private. Is so you can have what you want, basically, and that's also why I think we have so little in the written sources, like just mostly 2 accounts, like Alfredar Saga and Vastela Saga. Like, yeah, this dude has this Likneski or Hlutur, that's the Old Norse words, some Likneski man, so this thing that has the shape of a man, tiny, and he keeps it in the pouch. Okay.
Yeah.
But
yeah, I guess
not much more.
I guess it's not really an amazing part of a story to start talking about someone having a little thing in the little figure in their pouch. So it's probably not going to make it into many, I guess. Yeah,
maybe, I don't know, maybe also the writers who were writing down this material, they were not familiar with it. They were maybe more familiar with the idea of big idols, big size idols, because they, Christians, they also had maybe the statue of Virgin Mary or whatever, or they were familiar with, they were Latin learned. So they say, oh, okay, these idols, yeah, they are enthroned, they are triads, whatever. Like they also have the classics in their mind, right? Because those are learned people who write down this material. So, but about these, maybe they would not relate, or maybe simply it was something so personal, private, that it didn't really make too much into the writing record. That's possible.
Okay, so the only other little figures that I can think of would be like the Lewisman chess set. Now, would they class as little idols? Obviously, they're part of like a chess set, but also they're obviously very ornate and taking a lot of time to make.
They're expensive. They are made in ivory, I believe. So it's also expensive material. They are medieval. So even though there's the one biting the shield, maybe is the one that you have in mind. That's quite a famous one. The other interpretation, like for example, also for this Ireland image and the Baldur Seymour, the one in bone that was found in a burial site. The other interpretation is just like the king or the main figure of a sort of chess game that in Old Norse is called Nebatapl. Because also the Baldur Seymour figurine is found with other tiny bone pieces that could be the other parts of the game. Perkins, for example, says that, the fact that this could be actually the king of a game doesn't mean that it couldn't have also other functions. So in the case, maybe an idol. Who knows? Maybe that game was not so profane. Maybe there was something ritualistic about it. It's speculation. We can't know. Also, an interesting thing, the Baldur Seymour piece is made out of a different kind of bone. So he's made out of walrus or whale, while the other pieces are made out of cattle bone. So there's apparently a choice in realizing these items with different material, which might be interesting.
And that was obviously would be much more expensive and would be, I guess, would be looked after more.
Yeah, and maybe it's because exactly since that figurine is maybe not just the king of a game, it's not just a piece, but maybe it's relevant for another reason. Maybe you want to employ a higher quality kind of material. It's open to question.
Perfect. Okay, I have 2 questions left. One, I might be wrong in remembering this, but I feel like do we have a little figure of what some people think is Odin wearing a dress? Is that I haven't made that up, have
I think you're referring maybe the so-called Odin from Leire, that is from Denmark. That is that tiny, teeny, tiny figurine, sort of female looking like clothed female in a throne with the birds over the throne.
Yes,
that again, Odin from Leire obviously needs to be Odin, but it's open to question. It might be just a Ceres, might be a vulva. It's not necessarily Odin, you know. Obviously, we have the myth about Odin in that sense, so you can. It's open to question, you know. You don't have necessarily to exclude it, but you can't pinpoint it really. It's the same for those kind of humanoid figurines having maybe looking like having just one eye, and they must be therefore Odin, or the horned ones that they must be therefore Odin, which it doesn't really fit with interpretation. And there's also a very interesting master thesis about the horned kind of figures, which say the interpretation of this must be Odin is actually not very correct. It would be more correct to interpret this like sort of people dealing with rituals. Maybe that is a person putting something with oars because he's performing a ritual. It doesn't mean that it's necessarily Odin, how it would be represented. There's a world opening up about this. But
that's just reminded me of a conversation I had at Midgard's with a gentleman that makes their sort of idols that they use in the blood. And they're like the pillar, small, well, like 5-foot pillar idols. And he was saying when he's carving one, and you know, when he's carving the face and maybe the eye, and if he slipped, like he might be doing Tyr or Nord, and if he slips whilst he's doing the eye, he's like, now it's Odin. And he's just like, because he's slipped and he's taken one of the eyes out, he's like, now it's Odin now. And sometimes they change whilst carving. Yeah, so now sometimes they change whilst he's carving the wood based on if maybe
it can't be Freyr any longer because it would not make sense.
because if maybe the wood splits in a certain way or something happens, it's like, well, now it has to be and I guess that's the same with any of these little figures. If an eye comes out, it's automatically, oh well, I was doing Odin, I was making Odin the whole time anyway.
But exactly. And there's also another figurine of possible pocket idol, the so-called Freyr from Sweden, Rellinge, that is the one that has the erected penis that everybody calls Freyr because Freyr connected to abundance, crops, and maybe fertility. And then because we have Adam of Bremen essentially describing the temple in Uppsala where these big size idols are, and he says that Freyr has ingenti priapo. He has a big penis, so therefore the figurine is called Freyr. Also there, I mean, it's likely, but it's still open to questions. Maybe it's just a man having a happy moment.
I mean, it's not a bad way to go down in history, is it? If that's what they describe you as, it's like, I can live with that. Like, yeah, fair enough. That I'll go down forevermore as that.
He might be afraid. It might be fair, sure. If we trust Adam of Bremen, and also there we might open a huge chapter like how reliable the account might be and so forth. But
So my last question before we wrap this up and then jump over and do a Q&A and let people in the chat ask you some questions is if we know how the Christians looked at all these different idols, because obviously it's a sin to have any other idol than the one true God. Do we have an account of that? I'm guessing they would look at it very negatively.
Yeah, well, it depends. At least in the Islamic context, when Iceland decided to become Christian, at the beginning was not a big deal. You were allowed to do your pagan stuff in private, and that's it. Then you don't find much about these in the sagas, really, not in my knowledge, but you have some laws, like law manuscripts, codes, in which maybe there's more like now is prohibited to do this stuff or have, they don't really mention idols, but for example, they mention people are not allowed to have at home eithni statli, that it means like a sort of heathen altar where possibly people might have had some idols.
Okay.
So that is mentioned, for example. Or there are laws about in Sweden regarding these stuff garthar that might be sort of wooden poles with a face or whatever, something that deals with religions and rituals. There are laws that say it's prohibited for people to go there and sacrifice or bring offerings. So yeah, but there's nothing really specifically about, oh, you are not allowed to have a pocket idol in your pouch. Yeah.
No, fair enough. Yeah, I just wasn't sure if there would be just like a cutoff of like you can't have. Is it? I'm not very up to date on my Christianity, but is it one of the 10 commandments that thou shalt not have false idols? So I thought it might be seen as quite a negative thing that they would stamp down on.
Well, if you think about even just the term idol in Christian terms is like a false god, obviously it just even linguistically it has a negative connotation in that context, which is, I find it a bit funny in the sense because you can't have false idols, but you can have the statue of Virgin Mary and you can worship that because that's good. It's I always find it interesting. Then Christianity depends. Like in my culture, for example, I was brought up as a Catholic.
Go on.
And it's just very briefly, some people still nowadays, you have these tiny medals with saints or Virgin Mary. We call it Santini. I don't know if you know them.
I know the ones you mean.
Bring them around in your wallet, in your pocket. Maybe
and I think a lot gets made into
Christian pocket idol.
A lot get made into pendants as well. I think like a lot of people wear them around the neck.
Yeah.
So I mean,
it's very interesting.
Who would ever think that there would be hypocrisy in Christianity? Never. No way.
Never.
Perfect. Let's wrap this up. It's been a lot of fun. Obviously, we're gonna end the main show now, and then we're gonna have a nice little Q&A with the people watching. We've already got some pre-submitted questions for you as well. So anybody listening, if you want to follow one from this episode and join the Q&A, you can just jump over to Patreon. If you support us on Patreon at any level, I think the lowest tier is £4 a month. It's like buying me a cup of coffee once a month. It helps the show, helps us keep growing, and you get extra content. So every week you get a bonus episode with the guests where you can even submit your question before the episode and get your question answered. So where can people follow you? I guess maybe your Instagram, and people can find out a little bit more about you.
I prefer my email. Because I have a private Instagram account and because I'm a private person. But indeed,
I understand.
But should I write my email in the chat, or you have it and you can share it?
So what we'll do is we'll put your email in the show notes, and then people can maybe drop you an email if they have a question, if they don't get a chance to.
Sounds good.
Perfect. So obviously if you enjoy the show, please leave us a 5-star rating and a positive review wherever you listen. You can follow us more on Instagram, Facebook. We're going to start doing TikTok more and just getting some clips out there and trying to grow the show around. We're working on some merch. and obviously the YouTube channel. If you can take a minute just to subscribe and hit the little bell notification, that would be much appreciated. And you can watch all the episodes and see our pretty faces, I guess. Yeah. So thank you very much. This has been very interesting. I've very much enjoyed this. There we go.
Me too. That was awesome. Thank you for having me.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you very much.